Hello, I'm Rick, and this is Burn After Reading. Before I get into why Jason Baldwin was rightfully convicted of murdering Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, I'd like to add something I wish I would have put in the last video regarding Damien Echols. I was reading the West Memphis 3 Revelations blog, and there was a great post about an overlooked witness. The statement was made in September of 1993 by a woman named Carrie Morris. She alleged that on the date of the murders, she witnessed Damien Echols following Michael Moore hours prior to the crime. To add weight to her statement, she was a longtime family friend of the Moores. Her 1993 statement reads as follows. On Wednesday, May 5th, 1993, I was going toward Barton when I saw Michael Moore walking about 3 houses in front of Mr. Echols. Michael Moore was going home to get his bicycle to go trail riding with Stevie Branch. This was about 3:30 or 4 p.m. About an hour later, Michael, Stevie, and Chris came and asked my daughter, Tiffany Morris, to go riding with them. I told them no. We left to go to Memphis when they were chasing my truck. This was about 4:30 p.m. Damien and Michael were both walking south on 700 block North Wilson on the east side of the street. I know it was Damien Echols because I saw his picture in the paper after he was arrested. I knew it was Michael from school and knowing his parents all my life, and known Michael for about 3 years ever since he moved back from Florida. If you recall Jennifer Burden, a friend of Damien and Jason, she stated she was on the phone with Damien at some point around 3:15 or 3:30 p.m. that day, and that during this call he stated that he was going to walk to Jason Baldwin's house. Jennifer then called Jason's house around 5:30 p.m. where Damien was playing a video game with Jason's younger brother. Between the times Jennifer talked to Damien before he left and after he arrived to Jason's, this fits between the timetable of Carrie's statement. Many years later, Carrie would stand by her statement in a series of posts she made to social media in 2018. I'll read 2 of them. In one post, she writes, "Look, I know what I saw on that dreadful day. I saw Damien following Michael. He was like 2 doors back from him." In another post, she writes, "Look, I deal with my demons on a daily basis and blame myself. I wish that I could change things that day, but I can't." There's no way Carrie could have known what awaited those 3 boys that horrific day. And it's truly heartbreaking that she blames herself due to the weight of the question of what if I could have changed those circumstances. It's powerful and heavy to contemplate. This is one of those moments where I feel state prosecutors drop the ball. This witness statement is significant in my opinion. Carrie should have been called to testify. Her statements were consistent with the timelines and showed no discrepancies. Kudos to the West Memphis 3 Revelations blog for highlighting this overlooked witness. The statement can also be found on Callahan, but I just feel that this was perfectly highlighted and I needed to share it. Now on to Jason Baldwin. Jason Baldwin has been described as a shy and mild-mannered young man by Jason's former defense attorney, Paul Ford. Jason's friends and family described him the same way. They said he made good grades and looked after his family. Others have brought up his slender physical appearance as evidence that there's no way that a kid like that could ever be capable of such a horrific crime. If history taught us anything, it is that we should never judge a book by its cover. There's a Japanese parable about people having 3 faces. The first face you show to the world. The second face you show to your friends and family. The third face you never show to anyone you want alive, and it is the truest reflection of who you are. In this case, anyone who thought that they knew Jason, they were wrong. Under the influence of an older friend's disturbing fantasy, Jason would prove to be very capable of murder. Take Jeffrey Dahmer, for instance. Many, including a prom date named Bridget Geiger, considered Dahmer to be a shy and polite person. Dahmer came from a broken home, had issues with alcohol, and messed around with dead animals, but no one ever considered him violent to other people. Like Dahmer, Jason also came from a broken home. In addition, he would vandalize property, and he stole, so not quite the saint others try to make him out to be. He also hunted and killed snakes, skinned them. It's an interesting skill because of what happened to Christopher Byers. I hate to bring it up, but unfortunately Byers' testicles, they were removed as was the skin of the penis. It's not very easy to talk about, to be honest, but unfortunately needs to be said. Now, how about Ted Bundy? He was intelligent and bright. He was, very kind to people. He knew both professionally and socially. He volunteered at Seattle's Suicide Hotline Center to talk people out of killing themselves. At the end of the shift, he would walk Anne Rule, a fellow volunteer, to her car at night to make sure that she made it there safely. Not only did she believe he was initially innocent of rape and murder, but so did all his co-workers. People talked highly of Bundy. He was well respected in social and political circles. Clearly and surely no one like him could do such a thing. He's so nice. Of course, we know that's not the case. Now here's one. I want you to take a good look at this photo. Look at the two teenagers from the left and the middle. Do they look like girls who would murder their friend on the right? No? Well, that's exactly what happened. Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf murdered Skylar Neese by stabbing her to death. The motive? They simply didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Some motives defy logic. The point of these examples are to prove that just because someone doesn't look or act like they are capable of murder doesn't mean that they aren't capable. Murderers, they come in all shapes and sizes. And you have to assess everything case by case. Just because Jason is mild-mannered and shy to them or to you doesn't mean he wasn't capable of a horrific crime. And I assure you he was. Here's the thing. We can place Jason at the crime based on two things. One, Jesse's multiple confessions. Two, Damien told Jennifer Bearden and Jason's girlfriend at the time, Heather, that Jason was with him that night. Let's go back to Jennifer. On May 5th, 1993, sometime around 5:30 p.m., she stated that she called Jason's house and talked to both him and Damien, and he told her that they were going out and that Jason's mother, Gail Grinnell, was going to drive them somewhere. Damien didn't specify where that somewhere was. As we already know, Damien and Jason's whereabouts were unaccounted for between the hours shortly after 5:30 p.m. and sometime before 10 p.m. It's accounted for that Gail worked that evening from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., making it impossible that Jason's mother drove them anywhere. It's interesting that Damien would lie about that part. However, we still know that they were together because Damien talked to Heather, Jason's, like I said, girlfriend at the time, on the phone around 10:30 p.m., telling her that he was walking around with Jason. Now, you want to hear something that's strange? In a 2008 affidavit, Heather stated that one of the murder victims, Christopher Byers, was at her house sometime that day on May 5th, 1993. Pretty strange, right? Another missing piece to connect to the overall puzzle. Just really, really bizarre. So let's go back to Gail. Let's talk more about her. Gail Grinnell, didn't want her son talking to police. When the West Memphis police detectives tried to talk to Jason along with Damien and Dominique on May 9th of 1993, Gail flipped out. She told the detectives that she didn't want them talking to her son. The detectives tried reasoning with her, but Gail refused. The detectives had no choice but to leave. Look, Gail was well within her rights, but her actions were anything, you know, it was anything other, that of a mother who felt her son was innocent, but rather, it seemed like a mother who would protect her son at any cost. Why wouldn't she want Jason to answer questions and give his alibi? Why wouldn't she want her son to give whatever information to police to rule him out as either a person of interest or as a suspect? In September 23rd, 1993, there was an interview that John Fogelman did. He's one of the state prosecutors. He asked Gail why she was so belligerent to the detectives that day. So Fogelman asks, okay, can you tell me why you got so upset that day that the police were talking to Jason and Damien and Dominique out in front of your trailer? Angela replies, because they had a lot of rumors going around about them and had gotten me upset. So Fogelman asks, okay, I see. Then you didn't want the police talking to Jason? And Angela replies, no. Keep in mind, too, I should probably state, Gail is also known as Angela, so I want to make sure that's clear. Sorry for any confusion. I should have clarified that up front. So Fogelman, he asks, okay, can you tell me why? And Angela, or Gail, whatever you want to call her, she replies, I thought that Damien was guilty or something, and I didn't want, Jason running around with him. Fogelman asks, you didn't want Jason running around with Damien? Angela responds, look, I know they're innocent. I know they're all innocent. And Fogelman's like, all right, well, did Jason tell you anything that scared you? Angela responds, no. Fogelman asks, are you sure? And she says, I'm sure. So Gail, Angela, we'll just say Gail just to keep it clear. She thought Damien was initially guilty and didn't want her son hanging out with him. She knew if Jason could be placed with Damien that evening, then it was game over. Now, Jason told Gail he was walking to Walmart with Ken Watkins, allegedly, but we know that's a lie because the previous statements made by Jennifer and Heather. Damien told them he was with Jason, so that, there's no doubt, places Damien with Jason that night, and there was no one else that could, other than Jesse, that can hold them together. Period. Here's something that's pretty interesting. Jesse Baldwin, Jason's grandmother on his father's side, wasn't at all surprised with Jason's involvement. In the June 5th edition of the Memphis Commercial Appeal, she stated, I thought in my own mind when those boys were killed that my grandson is sort of superstitious about that devil stuff, said Jessie Mae Baldwin. He was always catching lizards and snakes, and I thought something was going on in that child's mind. Now Baldwin, who is 76, said that she and her husband, Perd Baldwin, who was 82, learned of her grandson's arrest from a television report Friday morning. She says, we just looked at each other, and I said, I don't know what that boy has on his mind, killing those people like that. So, pretty crazy. You have Jason's grandparents who thought he did it, and then you have Gail, who at least admitted that she thought Damien had something to do with it. And of course, you have to understand, she had to change her mind on that, because if it could be proven that Damien and Jason were together, it hurts Jason. So, something to consider. In Paradise Lost, The Childhood Murders at Robin Hood Hills, Paul Ford asked Jason if he were on the jury, would he have found Damien guilty? So Ford asked, if you were on that jury, would you have a hard time letting him go? Jason answers, Yeah, Ford reaffirms. I would too. In fact, it should be telling that Paul Ford's strategy wasn't to prove his client innocent, but to prove reasonable doubt. So, other than Jason's own attorney believing that Damien was guilty, he found Jason's alibis inconsistent. Jason, his mother, uncle, brother, and friends gave different accounts of his whereabouts on the evening of May 5th, 1993. The alibis were so unreliable that Ford wisely decided not to use them because they would not hold up in cross-examination. We know Damien placed Jason with him that night. In addition, Ford wasn't comfortable with everything that Damien's counsel did at the time. It certainly hurt putting Damien on the stand, and Paul wasn't going to make that mistake with Jason. Damien's attorneys were set to prove their client innocent. But Ford's strategy wasn't to prove Jason's innocence. Instead, he wanted to establish reasonable doubt by poking holes in the state's argument. Here's a statement by Ford in his closing argument. That's what they want right there. Guilt by association. Because he's sitting over there with Damien, they want you to convict him. Because he has a best friend or a good friend. They want you to convict him. Do you share the beliefs of all your friends? Do you do everything all the time with all of your friends? Do some of your friends have beliefs that are different from yours? Do they do things that you don't want to do or don't think is correct? That's not right. Guilt by association is a horrible thing. But that's what they want in this case. They want you to think he's an accomplice, and giving you that instruction that says an accomplice so they can convict Jason without any evidence because of the evidence against somebody else. But that instruction says you must find that they aided, agreed to aid, or attempted to aid in order to find that they're an accomplice. And where is that evidence? Well, ignoring Jesse's multiple confessions, the fact that Damien places Jason with him that night implicates him as an accomplice. It is clear that Damien had influence over Jason. Jason's neighborhood friend, Samuel Dwyer, had insight into Jason's relationship with Damien. In his affidavit, he said Jason bought a black trench coat after meeting Damien and even started to talk like him. It's well documented that Jason followed Damien almost everywhere. Damien was the older of the two, and Jason obviously looked up to him. It is logical to conclude that Damien assimilated Jason, at least in a lot of ways, into the way in his way of thinking over a period of time. Jason also helped Damien when he attempted to run away with his ex-girlfriend, Deanna Holcomb. Now, even Damien said at one point, Jason would never give me up. So there you go. Now, the West Memphis 3 Revelations blog also posted an entry that we should examine. It's regarding forensic psychologist Catherine Ramsland's statements on common dynamic among team killers. She writes, many couples, no matter what gender, tend to follow a similar pattern. Two people meet and feel a strong attraction, or they are related and have established an intimate familiarity with each other that allows them to share fantasies, even violent ones. Typically, one is dominant, and that one seduces the other into sharing his or her fantasy, and then into acting it out. This perfectly describes people like Sheila and Rachel, the murderers of Skylar Neese. You can clearly see this with Damien and Jason, and Jesse to a certain degree. Damien was the leader while Jason and Jesse were the followers. Damien's fantasies of what it would be like to torture and murder someone is what led to this crime. It's more probable than not that if Jason and Jesse weren't friends with Damien, they most likely don't commit this kind of murder. Sure, I'm speculating, I know that, but doing so is based on solid trends and research. As little evidence as there was at the crime scene due to the bodies, clothes and objects submerged in water for about 18 hours. Red fibers, microscopically similar with a bathrobe found in Baldwin's home, it was found on the victims. And in 2012, the West Memphis 3 group of all-stars in the defense team attempted to refute this claim. But keep in mind that these are the same group of jackals who got O.J. Simpson and Casey Anthony off. Forgive me. So, like I said, forgive me if I find their findings slanted, because the fibers decayed over the years and the original criminalist who examined them was dead and cannot defend the attacks against her original findings. Just saying. Let's go into Michael Carson's testimony against Jason. I'm not going to go into depth about Michael Carson's testimony because I'm on the fence of its authenticity, because I don't find jailhouse snitch testimony credible. However, that can't be said for all jailhouse testimonies. If we want to go back to the Manson murders of 1969, Susan Atkins, a member of Charles Manson's family, confessed to her participation in the Taint LaBianca murders to Virginia Graham and Veronica Howard. They both reported her statements to the authorities, which led to more arrests, helping to solve the case. So Carson stated that Baldwin confessed the crimes to him. Now again, I won't go into all the detail of what was said, but Carson had already been released and faced no charges at the time when he decided to take the stand and and to testify against Jason Baldwin. So there's really nothing to gain. Like, he's not going to get a reduced charge or sentence. There's none of that he can get. I mean, one can maybe say he wanted his face on TV, but we're just speculating here. Carson also passed a polygraph test, and look, you already know how I feel about the polygraph, so that doesn't convince me one way or the other, but still needs to be stated. Years later, in 1996, Carson reaffirmed his testimony due to a musician who claimed that Carson admitted lying about Baldwin's confession. There was also Danny Williams. He was Carson's adolescent recovery counselor who provided court-ordered treatment for him during that time period. He stated that he told Carson about the child murder case and that he believed Carson was lying about Baldwin's jailhouse confession. Okay, so I'm not sure why Williams would believe that right off the bat. I mean, Carson already knew about the crime, and he brought that up to Jason. Asked him, "Did you do it?" He stated Jason initially denied it at first, but eventually confessed to it. Probably because maybe he felt that Carson wouldn't snitch. Jason Baldwin, this is interesting. In his first post-conviction interview, he said that he was in holding 48 hours on lockdown and never talked to Carson. I think he also believed Carson was in lockdown the entire time, and so there would have been no way that they would have talked to each other. But then there was another interview where he said that they did share the same space, or they probably shared the same space. So think about this. If Baldwin or Carson were on lockdown and were isolated, you would think any lawyer Jason ever had up until his release would be able to verify those facts. But instead, they don't go after that. They go after the credibility of the testimony. Not if they ever shared the same space. Think about that. Carson, he would also later go on to be interviewed in the documentary West of Memphis. It was financed by Lord of the Rings and Hobbit director Peter Jackson, and it was produced by Damien Eccles and his wife, Lori Davis. In it, Carson would say that he was not sure of his actions during the trial due to his use of LSD. And because of this, West Memphis 3 supporters claim that his statement, he was recanting. But hold on a second. He never actually said he lied in his statements or testimony, just that he didn't know what he was doing. Let's also understand that money was being given out in participation of this documentary. Sometimes money can make people do strange things. An example, the way that John Mark Byers acted a fool in the Paradise Lost series, more predominantly in part 2, where he acted as the film's main antagonist. So again, I wasn't fully convinced of Carson's testimony, but I'm also not comfortable saying that he lied either. Carson didn't have anything to gain by testifying against Jason, but he did have something to financially gain by saying the things that he said in west of Memphis. So he didn't recant, so I'll let you be the judge of that. Felt it was worth putting out there. Let's talk about the lake knife. On November 17th of 1993, a survival knife was discovered by law enforcement in a lake directly behind Jason's trailer. The knife was relevant because the discovered object was consistent with a weapon used to inflict some of the injuries found on the victims' bodies. Despite the discovery, West Memphis 3 supporters and attorneys gave various theories on how the knife ended up in the lake, completely ignoring the rule of Occam's razor. Damien and Jason's attorneys claimed that the knife was planted by police and didn't belong to Jason. Later, their theory changed as the defense claimed that the prosecution knew the knife was in the lake because the knife was thrown in the water a year before the murders. Samuel Dwyer claimed that Gail Grinnell threw the knife in the lake because she didn't want Jason to have knives. So we have different accounts here, and the only thing I have to ask is why the sudden change? Why didn't Jason admit the knife was his to begin with? Dennis Dint, Gail's boyfriend at the time, claimed to have seen Jason with a knife that fit the description of the lake knife. It's important to know that Dennis lived at Gail's for a month or two around the time of the murders. Jason confirmed this in his Rule 37 hearing years after his conviction. The issue of how the knife ended up in the lake would only continue to get more bizarre. Gail, who I also told you before goes by the name Angela, would give two completely different accounts on a West Memphis 3 Facebook group on how the knife ended up in the lake. So in one of the posts, she writes, "I want to say I never threw a knife in the lake. My children had no knives. I didn't allow it. By accident, a year earlier, Jason threw one in the middle of the lake because I wouldn't let him have it. My children had no knives at the time of the murders of those children. I can't make it any clearer or plainer." So Gail claimed that Jason threw the knife into the lake, an interesting statement since it was claimed that the knife was previously believed to be planted evidence. And Gail would go on to talk about that theory. "I have one thing to say. I had a neighbor 2 doors down from me who was friends with Officer Murray, a Marion juvenile officer. He told me himself he knew she did crack and visited her house often. Maybe he was the one who threw the knife in the lake. About 6 months before these murders happened, he flagged me down on the street at Lakeshore and asked me to go out and have a beer with him. I told him I didn't drink. Then he wanted me to have coffee with him. He knew me and my husband were separated. Was this vengeance for me not going out with him?" So, Gail went back to the theory that Jason was framed by the police because she turned down Officer Murray. Does that sound logical to any of you? Murray was so upset that Gail didn't accept his advances that she framed her son of murder. The idea is so damn preposterous that it belongs in an Oliver Stone movie. The thing about the internet is that everything you post can and come back to haunt you. It is inconceivable to make 2 entirely different stories and then claim that you can't make it any clearer or plainer. Was the knife Jason's or was it not? Was it thrown in the lake by Gail or Jason? Was it thrown in the lake before or after the murders? Was it planted by a scorned police officer or not? I can't make these questions any clearer or plainer, so which is it? The story of when and how the knife ended up in the lake once again differs from Gail and Samuel's statements. Matt Baldwin, Jason's younger brother, placed the knife in the lake after the murders. In addition to the survival knife that was found in the lake, Jason had his younger brother trade additional weapons to other friends because police suspected him of the Robin Hood Hills murders. So, in an online chat, Matt, under the handle Smudge, gave another statement of how the survival knife ended up in the lake. He placed the knife in the lake after the murders because police suspected Jason. Of course, the most damaging piece of evidence is Jesse Miskelly's multiple confessions, placing the knife in Jason's hand. He confessed that it was Jason, not Damien, and not Jesse, who cut off Christopher Byers' testicles and removed the skin of the penis. We know Jason is capable because he has experience of skinning snakes and other animals. The type of knife in Jesse's account was a lock blade, but let's also understand he was drunk on whiskey. Did he just get it wrong? He could have remembered it wrong. And keep in mind, Jesse's confessions couldn't be used in the Baldwin-Eccles trial, but hindsight still reveals it as a whole, and that shouldn't be discounted now or ever. There's also no telling if Jason had more than one knife with him. So I would also like to bring up that lake knife and some of the wounds that it caused the victims. A while back, a longtime West Memphis 3 researcher, Sean Wheeler, took another look on what had been described as a human bite mark on Stevie Branch's forehead. I remember this being on several West Memphis 3 blogs, and it was a big topic on several Facebook groups years ago. I'll quote the West Memphis 3 Facts webpage regarding this topic. Wheeler had 2 forensic odontologists, and that's dentists in layman terms, compare the wound to the missing compass slot on the handle of the lake knife. Now, according to Wheeler, forensic odontologists Homer Campbell and Peter Loomis, they're both experts in both tool mark and bite mark identification. Here's what Campbell and Loomis reported back. So, Campbell responds, I believe the injuries to the left forehead and upper lid of the left eye were produced by the knife recovered or one similar. I also sent the photos of the injuries and the knife to another for evaluation, and he agrees. Here is what Loomis reports back. Bingo. The circular mark sure looks like the butt of the survival knife. The measurements fit. The diameter of the injury is 33 millimeters, and the diameter of the prominent circular area of the butt of the knife is 29.8. The 3 lacerations under the eyebrow look like they were made by the serrations on the back of the knife. The measurements also fit here. The lacerations measure 11.2 millimeters between them, and the serrated points on the knife vary between 11.1 and 11.4. Of course, the photo with the wooden ruler is blurry as far as depicting these serrations, but I can still measure them. Also worth noting, the lake knife's missing compass may have had a metal pin. Some have speculated that the metal pin could have caused the X mark injury in the center of Stevie's forehead. Fogelman also clearly demonstrated in court that the lake knife could replicate the wound patterns found on the bodies. Now, the defense argued that demonstrating it on fruit wasn't scientific, but I mean, come on. You can use it on wood, fruit, flesh, or whatever, and those patterns are going to leave those same impressions. It's comical to think otherwise. So, on March 19th, 1994, Jason Baldwin was found guilty on 3 counts of murder. The court sentenced Baldwin to life in prison. In August 19th of 2011, along with Damien and Jesse, they accepted the Alford plea, a guilty conviction in where they can maintain innocence but concede that the state had enough evidence to convict them, and by doing so, they get to go free. Many will claim Jason always maintained his innocence even to this very day, but you know what? That means shit to me. You know, so did Scott Peterson, who murdered his pregnant wife and dumped her body in the San Francisco Bay on Christmas. So forgive me if I'm not impressed with a murderer maintaining their innocence to the very end, or to this day, or whatever. Well, until next time.